You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday, June 11th, 2023, around 3 p.m. This is the time where we do our play-by-mail sessions, and we finally have a new letter from Dear Holmes, so we're beginning a new case. It'll take us, we've now learned, 4 weeks, 4 letters, and then a solution. Before we get started with today's session, let's check in on the chat, see how everyone is doing. We've got our regulars here, 13 people in the channel. This is a good time to remind you to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in that. My strategy now is to remind everyone to use the like feature on this video and every other video on YouTube according to your philosophy, whatever that may be. Maybe your philosophy is to thumbs down everything. That's fine with me. Just don't forget. Do your system. Use your system. I'd love to hear what people are up to in the channel when you join. One of the channels, I watch a lot of YouTube for cringe purposes. In fact, I've just stumbled on this video. This isn't a cringe video, but I stumbled on a video from a Japanese-American stationery online store called Jet Pens. And they've got a very charismatic woman there who's the marketing person. And they've got like, I don't know, it's got like 800,000 subscribers or 300,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel for the online pen store. And it's because the videos are quite compelling and there's some with some outtakes. Anyway, I would recommend it. That's not cringe. That's just my YouTube viewing habits. But I watch Rob Oren, Rob's Tabletop World, and we could talk about, we're not supposed to. Okay, anyway, the point is that he's always getting mad when people come into his channel, or the idea of someone coming into a channel and talking about their own project or whatever. But I'd love to hear about your projects. If you've got something you're working on, feel free to let people know about it. And which brings us to Jonathan Warner's book club. Jonathan Warner has posted a link to his Discord. And each week, it's a fair play mystery book. So it's a book where it's a detective story. You would read it and then talk about it on Discord as you're reading. And then at the end, try to solve the mystery. And so Jonathan has picked the first book, which has had its first week. It's called The Red Right Hand. It's quite compelling, quite interesting book. Written in the 40s, a very different style. But if you're interested in discussing that, if you can't get enough mystery, look for the link in this YouTube channel to Jonathan's. It's Jonathan's baby. It's his project. I'm just joining it to participate in the discussion. What else? I brought with me a little show and tell here. I want to show this new thing I've been doing that I really like. So if you're... I have a theory about why there's so many YouTube coffee channels and why people get so obsessed with coffee. And that's a very simple theory. And that is that caffeine is a drug, and like any other drug that's habit forming, people build rituals around them. Anything that will prolong the experience and set up the dopamine system for getting reward and anticipating reward. So people tend to do crazy things around coffee, and I'm sort of one of them. But this is something that I have been doing lately, which I love, which is I put the coffee, I decant the coffee from bags into these mason jars, and now I've cut out the label from the bags and taped them. And I use this white, I've got like three jars of regular coffee that all has this top, and then the decaf has a slightly different top. But there's something enjoyable about getting to see the real label, but then also having these nice sized jars. They're much more convenient to scoop out of than a bag. And so that's what I'm drinking today, this Kenyan Double A, which is my favorite of all the local coffees. I only drink the local coffees here. Mad Goat is the company that most of the coffees we drink are from. But then there's this little micro roastery called Page Coffee. And the Kenya Double A is the most expensive of all the coffees in Champagne that are local. But it does taste to me like the best one. Okay, let's see if we can get that out of the way. That's our little local plug for the local coffee roasteries. Anything else we should catch up on before we get started here? Greg and I have been playing Mythos Tales for the last 2 weeks. We played Case 3 on Friday. It took about 5 hours or so. And lots to talk about Mythos. Mythos Tales is behind me there in that big green box. It's Cthulhu Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Was created as a fan thing, then kickstarted. Sort of has a bunch of bugs and errata, but I'm finally making my way through it, and I'm finding the story writing very compelling, but some complaints about the actual mystery. And if you're interested in the design of these kinds of games, which I am, especially now since I've been working on designing my own, there's some interesting lessons to be learned about how you design a mystery that's satisfying to solve, and the difference between the narrative and the deduction. So we'll probably keep playing that over the coming weeks. And I'm finding myself get very compelled by the occult setting, and I'd like to play more of those. We have a couple. We've been through Bureau of Investigation, which is the other one, in Mythos Tales, but that's the extent of the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective style games. But I have a couple others. I have the Escape Tales box, which is sort of narrative and puzzle, which is down there, right there, the Wormwood one, which I'm sort of curious to get into. And hopefully Greg will be back soon to record more videos. I've set up the live thing to do a little bit better with Greg. And Greg wants to do a couple videos on the new Stranger Things co-op game because he's going to gift it to someone. And so we'll be doing a tutorial and review of that. All right, what else here? I see the question was, any Japanese green tea in the house? Well, my wife is a big green tea drinker, and she drinks this roasted green tea. It's called Sencha or something. I can't remember the name of it now. But I know I get tricked. Anytime she asks if we want to go on a walk, We take walks often, but there's frequently a trip to the local store here to get some more of that. All right. What else should we talk about? I also want to play another Deadbolt Mystery Society box this week, so that we're almost at another set of 5 played, and then I'll do a little review of another 5. Jonathan says there are some fan cases from Mythos Tales on BGG. Is that true? I didn't realize there were. Okay. Okay, I guess we're going to get started here. Last thing before we get started, I'm not sure if anyone has any suggestions for the best way to do these, if there are any ideas for doing these sessions. One thing that I feel a little bit, the first session we played, the Chalfont Outrages, was really engaging. Everyone really took it seriously. And then we got the solution, which we weren't all that thrilled with. But one of the things where I feel I let us down is that I feel like we sort of rushed through that solution session, and probably we should have sat there and just talked for more. We probably could have talked for another hour reading the solution. And so I feel a little bit bad about that. I wonder if we shouldn't have a little extra session talking about last month's case, just talking it through, getting it out of our system. But my meta theory, which is not official canon of the game, is that we weren't so thrilled with Sherlock Holmes' solution last 2 weeks ago, whenever we got it to that case. So I think we're going to pretend in our own world that there's a larger overarching case going on. And that case has to do with, it's not really Sherlock Holmes sending us the solution. So there's a bigger case afoot. And so when we read the solution eventually for this case, we might want to keep that in mind, but that's going to be several weeks away. All right, let's open this up and see what our new case is. So when you get the letter, I forget whether it tells you what the title of each case is. It doesn't say it on the envelope. It does say letter 1 of this new case. But when they send the emails, they tell you the name of this case, this set of 4 letters which form a case. This one's the Fickle Fiancés. And there's also been some discussion about something unusual. Looks like we got some sort of code here, which I could see through the envelope originally. Someone has pointed out that something's unusual happened with this latest Dear Holmes case. Normally they post their favorite solution. This one was very late in posting a solution, and then they didn't seem to post a favorite one, so I'm not sure what that means. Maybe that has to do with our bigger mystery of it not really being Sherlock Holmes that's sending us our solutions. Okay, let us see what we've got here. So we've got 3 pages, actually 2 and a letter from Watson, it looks like. Maybe Watson is going to be telling us that Sherlock Holmes is taking a nap, taking a break, is in recovery. Okay, Matt says, ME says, are we going to take notes for this one? Well, we absolutely are going to take notes. I've been taking notes in the margins, but what we discussed last time, this is on the topic of, are there better ways to present this? And I'm open for other ideas if people want to have extra sessions where we just talk. But I have made a little Google Docs for us to keep notes. And we will be keeping digital notes. Digital notes are a lot easier to read. So I have set this up. And in the past, the way we've played long games with Google Docs as notes is that if people want access to this, the regulars can have access to help keep notes, and then people can go visit them as well and leave comments on them. But we'll use this to keep track of notes. One of the things I have found, though, is it's difficult, is that it's like anything else. You can read your notes and make sense of them. As soon as other people start filling out notes, even though they're putting lots of useful information, it requires an extra amount of work to go through them. So it's a little bit better for me if I keep my own notes. But We'll work on that. If anyone else has any theories about the best way to present these cases and do them, please let me know in terms of formatting for the sessions, etc. Okay, let's see what we've got here. John H. Watson, MD. 221B Baker Street, London, May 13th, 1904. Let's get ourselves zoomed in here. Dear Detective, I hope this letter finds you in good health and high spirits. Holmes is presently away in Prague, but he asked me to solicit your help in his stead for any cases requiring urgent attention. One such case arrived this morning, and I hope you'll be able to lend your expertise. The matter in question involves Miss Ruth Dresser, soon to be Mrs. Ward, who believes her fiancé has been poisoned. Miss Dresser also stumbled upon several distressing items in the man's office suggesting something is amiss. Dalton Ward, the fiancé and a political aspirant, is undeterred by the possible threats to his welfare and intends to proceed with the upcoming campaign. Thus, it is imperative we investigate promptly. Enclosed is Miss Dresser's full letter to Holmes, as well as a brief list of questions. If answered, I think these would no doubt provide relief to our client. Here are the questions. 1. Is Mr. Ward the victim of an attack? And if so, how exactly was the crime executed? I do believe he is in peril, yet the nature of that threat eludes me. 2. Who would have a strong motive to harm Mr. Ward, and could there have been any accomplices? 3. The items Miss Dresser found in his fireplace, that is, the golden pin and the charred note, leave me perplexed. What is their significance? I will forward additional correspondence to you as it arrives. In the interim, should you formulate any interesting theories or indeed manage to solve the case, I urge you to mail your conclusion to our associates in America at the following address. They will wire any messages to Baker Street so that I can take appropriate action. And there's the address. Holmes has great faith in your abilities, and in any case, he will review the facts and send you a duplicate of his own solution once he has returned to London in approximately 1 month's time. Thank you for your prompt attention in this matter. I eagerly await your insights and trust that together we shall unravel this perplexing mystery. Yours sincerely, John H. Watson, M.D. Okay. As has been pointing out in the channel, this is a very different feel. It's given us a very clear set of questions to answer. I'll remind you that for those of you who haven't watched our previous streams from Dear Holmes, I'm not going to go into in detail the format of this system, but 4 cases, 4 letters, and then a solution. We're learning a little bit about the system as we go. But one of the things that is known is that different people write different cases. So the actual writer for this month's case may be quite different, maybe a different author than last month's case. So they have their own style and system. All right. So that's John Watson's letter. And now he's forwarding us the letter, I guess, from Miss Dresser. Yes, enclosed is Miss Dresser's full letter to Holmes. Okay. So that was Watson setting up the case, and here is the letter from Dresser. 7 Bassett Road, North Kensington, London, May 13th. Okay, I guess that's the same. He's forwarded it to us right away. Okay. And there's her... What is this? DR? What is this logo of? Dear Mr. Holmes, I'm writing to you from St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where I watch over my dearest fiancé, Dalton Ward. Please forgive me for starting with a demand, but I need your help protecting him. Dalton is recovering from what I'm confident was an attempt to poison him. The medical evidence to date is inconclusive in this regard, and Dalton denies there's been wrongdoing, yet I've made several discoveries that suggest otherwise. I worry that he is refusing to seek proper assistance for fear of some great consequence he is not revealing. This all began when Dalton was sent to the hospital on 11 May, shortly after attending a gathering to announce our engagement. He's currently an aspiring member of Parliament in the Beckenham district. As being unmarried is a mark against him in the political arena, Dalton proposed announcing our engagement earlier than planned. He suggested we simply make a joyous public occasion of it on the same day upon which we'd met 1 year ago. Not knowing it would become a spectacle marring our anniversary, I was happy to oblige. While my family and friends attended the party, we were in the minority that day. Representatives from a dozen newspapers, Tory members from local districts, and a gaggle of unsavory persons unknown to me poured into the gardens behind Dalton's home near High Elms Park. A seafood luncheon of prawn cocktails, salmon, and jellied eels, along with some cakes made with cheese, was served under a gossamer tent, and a string quartet from the Royal Albert Hall played in the pavilion at the hub of the gardens. The festivities commenced with Papa's announcement of our engagement and a toast, after which Dalton, Papa, and I made our way to the tables where my family was seated. A dowager grandmother, Sophie, my dowager grandmother, Sophie, my Uncle Philip and Aunt Mina, and a host of cousins. Dalton briefly engaged the reporters from there, offering an opportunity for interviews in the study following lunch. He then suggested we enjoy our meal together in private to celebrate without distraction, if only for a moment. This we did at the pavilion, which Niles, his valet, had cleared of all people save the string quartet and furnished with a lovely mixture of food. Even with the violins playing, it was difficult to forget that we were amid a sea of others. We could hear a fellow roaring at poor Niles near the desserts. The elderly man staggered after Niles in the distance as Dalton explained, "Oh, that's Belsey, one of Father's old business associates, invited as a courtesy." Standing next to him was another strange specimen of a man wearing a fur waistcoat, white spats, and a gold pin on his lapel. The man waved a bottle of wine before walking in our direction, but Niles promptly led him away. I asked Dalton if that was another associate of his father's, and he shook his head, taking my hand. "No, my dear, and we shouldn't allow another interruption. This is our day, too." Only then did the small symphony beside us begin to overtake me and hush the noise of the party. For some minutes I was at peace with my fiancée. However, the demands of politics ended our interlude when Mr. David McBain, a familiar reporter, pushed his way past Niles towards the pavilion. "The Mirror canna wait another minute, laddie. Let's ha' that interview," he declared. Dalton held back a sigh and looked at me as he so often does in those moments. "Ah, very well," he said. Then he took a last bite of cake and escorted McBain to the study. I enjoy the social aspects of Dalton's career, but I wish there were less demands on his time. As the two disappeared into the house, I finished my salmon and advised Niles that the pavilion was at our guest's disposal. Perhaps 10 minutes later, I had made my way back to my family. My grandmother was recounting her morning when shouts rose above the music and heads turned, alerting me to the first of several peculiar events that day. Dalton burst out of the house bellowing, "The man's a devil!" Moments later, McBain, the irksome red-haired fellow from the Mirror, exited past him with a satisfied smirk. He had come to my door last week, but I ran him off at Dalton's behest. Though he disdains reporters in general, McBain in particular upsets Dalton by focusing on his past rather than the man he is now, who is like a phoenix risen from the ashes. I carried a glass of water to my fiancé and reminded him that Mr. McBain would love to see him drawing disagreeable attention. "The man mercilessly dogs me," Dalton remarked as he drank. His temper cooled when he locked eyes with a man standing near the jellied eel. "Mr. Hammersmith from the Telegraph," he muttered. "A notorious Labour Party backer." Nodding towards the reporter, he added, I promised an interview to someone from the Daily Mail, too. Don't know who they sent this time, but can't be worse than McBain. And with those words, we parted ways again so I could entertain guests outdoors while he concluded his interviews. Truthfully, I spent much of the remaining hour reassuring my family that Dalton was fine, but in that time I met a guest worthy of noting. While I was speaking with my aunt and uncle, a dandy named Sonny Maggs approached to introduce himself, as I might imagine Bronte's Heathcliff. Mr. Maggs is the dark and dashing sort. He had arrived with a comely woman who seemed bejeweled rather than dressed. He also sported a golden pin on his lapel, a smiling mask similar to one Dalton wore when I first made his acquaintance. I began to wonder if these gold-pinned guests were theater folk from his school years. This is a fascinating setup. Excusing myself from my aunt and uncle, I asked Mr. Maggs how he knew Dalton. He guffawed before saying, I'm an old friend he would rather forget. I smiled, yet here you are. He found that amusing and handed me a card saying, Dalton was a regular of mine, and the spirit of generosity compels me to extend you a greeting. His card was adorned with the likeness of the mask on his lapel, and it bore the words, Club Coast, James Street, London. You must come by, he said, as my guest. Then Mr. Maggs' jaw clenched as if he saw lightning strike behind me. I turned to see his lady at the buffet table with Dalton, one arm over his shoulder. She laughed as she tipped a raw oyster onto Dalton's parted lips, wiped his chin with a napkin, tucked it into his suit coat pocket, and slinked off. Dalton was mesmerized. I sought to confront him when he suddenly stood, apologized to those near him, and hurried into the kitchen. The brazen woman skipped after him, but Mr. Maggs pulled her into the larger gathering before she could follow him in. When Dalton did not reappear after some minutes, I searched and found him in the upstairs corridor. He was bracing himself against Niles on the wall, retching over a table of ornaments. Niles waved me off and attempted to shield Dalton from sight as he gagged and groaned. Then my sweet fiancé fell to his knees. Niles leapt up and ran past me, saying he was calling for an ambulance. Dalton was crumpled on the carpet, and the wall above the table was spattered with blood and phlegm. I apologize for sharing these gruesome details, but I wanted you to be in possession of all the facts. It wasn't until the following day that the doctors at St. Bartholomew's diagnosed food poisoning complicated by ulcers, which they say accounts for the discolored spew. But the indelible image of that woman feeding Dalton has me believing he could have been poisoned. I hope Dalton would reach a similar conclusion when I mentioned that someone might have tampered with the food, yet he dismissed the notion, pointing out that no other guests had taken sick. I reluctantly agreed with him until today. Dalton and I had a row at the hospital this afternoon when I again raised the oyster question, this time finally mentioning the woman who had attended with Mr. Maggs. He scoffed. Vesta, that is Miss Victoria. Oh, Vesta, that is Miss Victoria. She enjoys ruffling feathers, but she adores Sonny as I adore you. She is no assassin, Ruth. Leave it be. I merely nodded, thinking I should give Dalton time to recover before pressing further. He apologized before asking me to fetch some of his belongings. Niles should have packed me a bag, and my leather portfolio is in the study. Please bring it as well. Of course, I said, and this errand yielded 3 telltale discoveries that led me to contact you. At the house, Miles finished packing Dalton's bag as I retrieved his portfolio from the study. There I found several unexpected items. First, a folded newspaper clipping atop his desk, a story reporting on Dalton's Stand for Decency rally, which I attended 2 weeks ago. Someone had scribbled on the headlines such that it now read, instead of stand for decency, it read, stand for indecencies. The I was used in part to cross out the Y. I left it and searched for Dalton's portfolio, where I made 2 other discoveries. Prompted by a small glimmer in the hearth, I used a poker to pull a tarnished gold pin from the ashes, and next to it a burned scrap of paper. The pin was precisely like the one that Mr. Maggs and the fellow with the fur waistcoat wore. I have not seen Dalton wear it since our first weeks together, and knowing he was something of a thespian in his youth, I had never thought it strange. As for the charred scrap of paper, it seemed to be marked with aimless lines. However, I detect in them a pattern and symmetry lacking in mindless scribbles. I have transcribed them for you at the bottom of this letter. Beyond this, there is one other detail regarding Dalton that I must mention. I recently determined to consult his gentleman's gentleman about the events of this week. So Niles is servant to Niles, is that what she's saying? Niles was reluctant to agree that something has been wrong with Dalton, but he surmised that it was likely nothing more than reporters upsetting his nerves. He confided that a police inspector had called on him a couple of weeks ago. First that red-haired chap came to see him, then hours later, late at night, an officer came a-knocking. Mr. Ward didn't say what it was about, just that it was the usual nonsense. Mr. Holmes, I know not what to make of all I've learned and witnessed in the past days. Nevertheless, I am certain that ulcers are far from a satisfactory explanation. More importantly, I worry for Dalton's safety. My fiancé is no fool, and while he says all is well, I sense unease in his words. Why would he go through such pains to lie to me? And what am I to think of the cryptic note he burned? If you feel that I am making too much of the trifling things I have reported, you need only say so. I do not wish to jeopardize my marriage because of idle speculation. If you do, however, feel as if this case is worthy of your time, please regard my sketch below and advise me at your earliest convenience. Yours with esteem, Miss Ruth Dresser. And here's the transcription of the markings in the burned notes. All curves, they look like very similar curves, but at angles and 1s, 2s, and 3s. So if you were to code this, you might have 2 dimensions. Each letter can be a tuple. One is whether it's a 1, 2, or 3, and the other one is what angle it's at. And they're all in 4-letter groupings, except for this last part. That's obviously a clue that it's in 4-letter groupings, but not a great one. Doesn't constrain you too much, but it does suggest that these aren't, well, obviously it doesn't always have to be 4, so it's not like always a four-digit thing, but that's a fairly short message if each of these is a letter, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The fact that it's 2 here, and we see some common, this is repeated here, makes me think that maybe we've got 2-letter pairs for each letter. Okay, let's check in with the chat and see what we make of this letter. I find it very compelling case. Very different from our first letter, but this one has got lots of people, lots of names, lots of odd facts and items to chew on. I feel like this one is gonna have us really chewing on it. Okay, let's check in with the chat, see what people are saying. Song of the Lute was talking about our last case we played. I like the pre-solution video the best. So Song of the Lute is just making a comment about how we play these cases, and that maybe we should have a session where we just talk about the case before we get to the solution. Okay. Emmy says, very different feel already. Debbie says, note that this is set in 1904, whereas the previous case was set in the 1920s. Okay, well, we're jumping around in time with this thing. It would make sense that different authors write different cases. They don't want to have to do them in sequence, but that's an interesting point. Do we get any fire? No smoke. Okay, I have to drop out. Is that a code on the bottom? It's absolutely a code. The group of two symbols might be the note was burnt, so you've got two symbols missing. That's an interesting theory. We should probably reread it and look for signs that any symbols were burned off. Debbie says, wonder if the lapel pins indicate a secret club or society. Mags mentioned Kos, which is a Greek word. Vesta is a Roman goddess, I believe. Vesta is the goddess of the hearth and home. That's quite interesting. Sure does seem like a little secret society. Vesta was used in one of the Sherlock Holmes, one of the James Bond recent movies. Okay, let's take another look through this, another skim through it, and see if what we want to highlight here. Okay, that's another poisoning. They sure like to poison people back in this day. Dalton Ward is her fiancé. Here are the questions she thinks are important for us. Is he the victim of an attack? If so, how was the crime executed? Who would have a motive and what accomplices? And how do you explain the items that she found? The note, the golden pin, those are the two items. Okay. All right. Now, do we know how long they've been going out? It is important because it seemed like what she was saying is when she met him, he was a member of this society. So this is from Watson. Let's see. Okay, let's take a look at our note again. All right. He denies, she's made discoveries, and then she thinks he's got a secret. That's the impression we got as well. He's got a secret, and there's a reason he doesn't want to draw attention to it. All right. Now, it began at the hospital on 11 May. So before he gets sick, he's at the hospital announcing their engagement. He's a member of parliament. He said he sped up their engagement. There we go. We met 1 year ago. Okay, there we go. 1 year ago. This is important because 1 year ago, he was still a member of the society, she says, because he was wearing the pin. Okay. And then this 11 May, which is just 2 days ago, is they announced. So they've been going out. They met about a year ago, almost exactly. And he was a member of the society by then. Okay, so they have it at this public place, the gardens near Dalton's house. They've got the orchestra from the Royal Albert Hall, famous orchestra. The father announces them. She's got her family with him. No sign that the family's unhappy about anything or would have any motive to harm him. He says, let's have our celebration in private. So they go to a private area, which has been cleared of all people. So there's no one around when they arrive for their private dinner. No one would have known what to poison just to affect him. And it's a huge clue that he's the only one who got sick. Although seafood is a good way to get natural food poisoning. Okay, and then she starts to describe all the interesting people. First, there's a person roaring at Niles near the desserts. An elderly man. So here's the first of many suspicious people she starts to draw our attention to. So there's an elderly man yelling at Niles, who's the valet of our main guy, Dalton Ward. And his name is Belsey. One of father's. So is Niles the son? One of father's old business associates. Have I misunderstood, thinking that Niles is the valet? Niles is the valet. So is it just Niles's? So clearly this is Niles. I'm a little confused about this. Can someone shed some clarity on what they think? Whose father? Is it Niles's father? One of father's old. Are they talking about? It sure sounded like this is. She's saying this is Dalton Ward's business associate, but then he refers to him as father. So I'm a little bit unclear. Let me see what the chat says. I think it means Dalton's father. It says Dalton explained. Dalton explained. I see. Okay, good catch. Okay, Dalton explained. So it's Dalton's father. Okay. So Dalton has a father who we don't hear referenced beyond this, I don't believe. But obviously Dalton's father is involved in something, or is still around, and this guy's Belsey. Okay, invited as a courtesy. Next to him was another strange man wearing a fur waistcoat, white spats, and a gold pin. Okay, so this is our person number 2 of interest. Fur waistcoats. The man waved a bottle of wine. Niles leads him away. We asked Dalton about this man, and Dalton says it's another. We asked if it was another associate of his father, and he said no, but he doesn't want to talk about it. Okay, and then he leads them away. All right. Then David McBain, who is the reporter from the Mirror, who we know quite well, Dalton is familiar with. He says, I want my interview. Dalton agrees, goes for a private interview with McBain. Okay, I guess David McBain is number 3 person of interest. So they go, they have the talk. Grandmother, her family's talking. Okay, then Dalton comes out and says the man's a devil. He's talking about McBain. And then McBain comes out. He's described as red-haired with a satisfied smile. He's happy he got Dalton upset. And now she fills us in a little bit about McBain. She says he came last week. We ran him out. And now he focuses on his past. So maybe we've gotten big hints that our guy Dalton has a past that he's trying to get away from. She doesn't tell us really about his past, but she does say that he's a completely different person now, a phoenix risen from the ashes. All right. So Dalton drinks his water that she gives him. Okay. I mean, maybe we should make a note of that. You could imagine someone poisoning her water, trying to kill her, but she gave it to him. Unlikely, though. He does drink it, though. Okay. He locked eyes with a man standing near the jellied eel. Mr. Hammersmith from the Telegraph. That's our person number 4, though he clearly doesn't seem important to our case. Notorious Labour Party backer. So we've gotten a little bit of politics here about he's running for Parliament. He's aligned with the Tories. Is that right? And his opponents would be Labour. Someone can fill us in a little bit about that. I promised an interview from someone in the Daily Mail. He says, okay, it's time for my interviews. So you entertain the guests, I'll go in and do the interviews. Okay, much of the remaining hour. So they spend an hour doing his interviews. Then she meets someone else, a dandy named Sonny Maggs. That's our person 5 who we're very interested in. He introduced himself. She compares him to Emily Bronte's Heathcliff, dark and dashing sort. And he arrives with a woman who we'll say is our number 6, bejeweled woman in skimpy clothing. And he's got a golden pin, a smiling mask. Similar, she doesn't say identical, but similar to the one Dalton wore when I first made his acquaintance. Okay, let's check in with the chat before we continue. Main opponents would be liberals. Labour was recent upstart party, although Labour was formed in 1903. So the Tories are the conservative, the right-wing upper class that he's a part of, and Labour and the liberals are the working class. Those would be the opponents of him. Although we definitely get a strong feeling that this is not about politics, but rather about his past. All right, let's keep going. This is our second pass through the letter, recapping, looking for notes. Okay, so she is assuming they're theater folk from his school years. We're not so sure. Okay, so she asks Maggs how he knew Dalton. And he just says, I'm an old friend he would rather forget. Yet here you are. He found that amusing, handed me a card. Dalton was a regular of mine. The spirit of generosity compels me to extend you a greeting. Now, that term, regular, jumps out at one, but you wouldn't say that in 2023. I don't believe whether you were British or American, that would not be an expression you would use unless you were talking about perhaps a client, like he's a regular client of mine. But I'm not sure that that's the implied meaning here. It sounds like this could be a term that you might use for a regular friend of mine. Does anyone have any insight into that? How would you use that term just to mean he's a regular friend of mine? Or do you think back in 1904 you would still only use that to mean something specific like a client? I'm going to put a comment here about that, regular. So when she gives him a card, it's adorned with the likeness of the mask, and it bore the words, Club Chaos, James Street, London. Not Club Chaos, Club Kos. And what is the channel's research into Kos, K-O-S? What do we think that is? You must come by as my guest. So he's got some pull over at the club, whether it's his club or where he's got some pull. Debbie says regular still implies client, she thinks, or someone who visits regularly. And Kos is a Greek island. Okay, so the channel seems to think that that word regular still has the same connotation that you wouldn't use it to mean a friend or someone you hang out with, but a client at the club. Okay, well, that's quite interesting then. All right, let's keep going here. Then his jaw clenched as if he saw lightning strike behind me. So it sounds like he sees his lady hanging out with Dalton, who she clearly knows. We know they know each other because he talks about her. But this guy seemed genuinely like upset about this. And she's awfully chummy. And she gives him an oyster. She laughs as she tipped a raw oyster into Dalton's lips. So they're obviously... Is this a club of women of the night? She's very familiar with him, though. She wiped it on his chin with a napkin, tucked it into a suit, and then slinked off. This is kind of interesting that she goes off on her own after she does this. Dalton is mesmerized. This is some woman at the club that he knows, obviously. So she thinks she's going to confront him, and he instantly gets sick. Right? He's sick almost immediately after she gives him this oyster. But then she goes after him, which is interesting. But Mags stops her. Okay. He's in there for a while. She goes in and he's retching with blood and discolored phlegm. Then they go to the hospital. They diagnose him with food poisoning complicated by ulcers. Now, this could be right. I mean, if he's upset about something from his past coming out, he could have ulcers. But it's not clear to us how substantial this diagnosis is, right? So it's not like we're told that the doctors could see the ulcer or something. This could be just like they're assuming that's what it is. Accounts for the discolored sputum. This is a clue. They're saying that the bloody ulcer is, that's why it's discolored. But it could be something else. She's very mad at this woman giving him the oyster still. Okay, so then they had a fight in the hospital. She brings up the oyster again and the woman feeding it to him. And he tells us it's nothing. It's just Vesta, otherwise known as Miss Victoria, likes to ruffle feathers. But she adores Sonny as I adore you. All right. She's no assassin, leave it be. He seems pretty convinced. So she says, okay, I'm just going to let him get better. He wants her to go pick up something. He says, Niles packed me a bag. My leather portfolio is in the study. Please bring it as well. Of course. Okay, leather portfolio in the study. Doesn't seem to be hiding it particularly, right? So that might be a little bit of a clue. Whatever's in there is not so secretive. Niles packs the bag. She gets the portfolio. But she notices that on the desk is a folded newspaper clipping. It's about his Stand for Decency rally from 2 weeks ago. Someone had scribbled on it. Okay. They changed it to indecencies. And then she tells us some particulars about how it was changed. The I was used in part to cross out the Y. So she's just explaining to us. So I guess she's saying that someone wrote the IN and then sort of crossed out this Y and wrote IES on top of the Y. I'm not sure why she didn't just reproduce that for us, but maybe she didn't think to do it. Someone had scribbled, okay. I would have liked her to show us their handwriting or something. I guess there's not too much to get from that. So she searched for the portfolio. She made 2 other discoveries. Glimmer in the hearth, tarnished gold pin, and next to it a burned scrap of paper. Okay. The pin was precisely like the one that Mr. Maggs and the fellow with the fur waistcoat wore. Did I note that the fur coat guy had the gold pin? Yes, I did. Okay. So another, it may be Ward's, it may be her fiancé's gold pin that he's thrown into the ash, or it's someone else's. I have not seen Dalton wear it since our first weeks together. Knowing he was something of a thespian, I never thought it strange. As for the charred scrap of paper, it seemed to be marked with aimless lines. However, I detected in them a pattern and symmetry. I have transcribed them for you. All right, she doesn't say they were burned off. It would have been nice if she showed us the outline of the paper so we could see if it was burned here or if it just ended here. But I would guess, she's pretty observant. I would think that if it was burned in a way, I would guess that there would be a partial symbol if we were meant to think that there was some that got burned off. This seems to be the complete message if I had to guess. Okay, and she's transcribed them. Okay, one other detail, she says. I recently determined to consult his gentleman's gentleman. What's the chat's reading of that? His gentleman's gentleman. I'm thinking his gentleman is going to be Niles. So who is his gentleman's gentleman? That's weird. Is that just the term you would use to talk about the valet? The gentleman meaning Ward's gentleman? Maybe that's just a term you would use to refer to the valet. Niles was reluctant to agree that something has been wrong, but he surmised it was nothing more than the reporters upsetting his nerves. He confided that a police inspector had called on him a couple of weeks ago. First, the red-haired chap came to see him. That's the McBain, the reporter. Then hours later, late at night, an officer came knocking. Mr. Ward didn't say what it was about, just that it was the usual nonsense. This sounds like he called the cops after a reporter told him about something. Hours later. Sounds like this reporter came to meet him, and then he called the police. And it was late at night, so something quite that couldn't wait. He's no fool. He says all is well. I sense unease in his words. Yeah, something is... He knows he's in danger, but he doesn't want to say anything. And then we have our note, which we're going to make note. Our notes about this so far are groups of 4, 2 at the end. We have 3 different symbols plus their angle. All right. So we've been through it. We've made our notes. Let's see what the chat has to say here. We've been going for about an hour, so we might not spend too much more time on this for our first session. Okay, gentleman's gentleman is just another way of referring to the valet. It's a term for a butler. Okay, I see. A gentleman's gentleman. Interesting. Okay. Is there some kind of campaign going on against Dalton as well? It says the inspector called on Dalton, not that he called the inspector. Well, that's an interesting point, but it's hard to know. Don't forget, we're being told from the valet's point of view. So as far as the valet sees, the inspector just showed up late at night, a couple hours later. But it's possible that he reached out to the inspector. But maybe he wouldn't do that on his own. Maybe the man of the house would have the butler make the call for him. But maybe if he's nervous about it and doesn't want to alert anyone, he wouldn't. So I don't know if we should assume that the inspector just showed up on his own. Emmy says, I don't buy this food poisoning because no one else got sick. I'm happy this is poison. I'm not sure the oyster was poison. His reaction was too quick. I think it happens earlier. Yeah. Could Vesta have passed him the note while tucking in the napkin? I think that's a very good observation, that the tucking in the napkin was very suspicious. I picked up that too, and I think you're right that that is worth making a extra note about. She wiped his chin with a napkin and then tucked it into his suit coat pocket. That's very suspicious. So napkin note, I'm just going to put. Now, I do think it's worth noting something here. I was thinking, okay, we know he's feeling in danger prior to this, right? When is the inspector coming? The inspector came, let's see, maybe I should note how long ago. Recently, there's one other detail. She asked Niles, he says, couple of weeks ago, actually, couple of weeks. This is quite a while ago. Weeks ago that this happened, that the inspector came. Okay, so I was thinking, well, should we consider that he might not have been poisoned, that he was just somehow upset by something so badly and he's got his ulcer and everything? But I think we can rule that out because the scene that our Miss Dresser paints to us is she sees the woman approach him and she's got her eyes locked on that woman and what she's doing with her fiancé. So she's watching it all happen in real time. And in real time, the woman may have slipped a note in his pocket, but he doesn't see it yet. Right? Because instantly he gets sick while he's mesmerized. So he's not in a bad mood. He's not upset. Nothing happened to upset him. He's actually quite happy to see this Vesta woman, Miss Victoria. But he suddenly gets sick. So it's possible that it's just a coincidence, but it sure seems like it's poison. It's not that something upset him. He was poisoned. Yeah, and if our theory about the note is true, is right, then the oyster is just an excuse to get over to him. It would make very little sense to do both, unless you were leaving a note like you've been killed by the Kosk organization. And as you kill them, you put the note. But he obviously didn't fear her. I wonder if the group believes this thing that he had an ulcer, or if this is just a cover. And then who do you think crossed out this note? Who is he? Is it that one of the reporters is blackmailing him? Is that what we're dealing with? So remember, they're in the study. This is in the study where the newspaper clipping, which is folded, on his desk. So maybe that's what she put in his pocket, or one of the reporters put it in his pocket. Let's check in with the chat. Let's see. Did he know he'd been poisoned and made himself sick? It sure doesn't seem like it. Rob says, Jesse, did you fix the YouTube chat? One of Emmy's messages did not show up on the stream, but did show up on the stream, but not in the top chat here on YouTube. There's something weird about YouTube with its top chat and live chat. I don't have a full understanding of why on earth they do that, especially for a small channel with this. It filters out some based on some algorithm we don't understand, and I don't know exactly how to tell it what to show. Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying, though. You're saying it shows up on my view, but not what you're viewing. So then I guess the solution is you'd have to change. That's good then. If it's showing up on my list on screen that you can see on the screen, split screen with me, but not in your YouTube comments, then you can change your YouTube comments to be just live. Let me know if it's the reverse, though. Let me know if it's not showing up on my split screen. Okay. Oh, you're asking me if I fixed it. I did try to fix it. I did try to fix it using some JavaScript to dynamically switch the sort of a technical detail, but the split screen of a chat is a browser source plugin in OBS, which just opens the default YouTube page. I do have a patch to OBS that lets it run custom JavaScript in the OBS browser sources, and I have some custom JavaScript that tries to switch the page into the live chat view, so maybe I did fix it. Okay. Doctors think it's poison ulcer. They knew he had an allergic. Well, it can't be that he had an allergic reaction to sea fish. It's a seafood buffet, and he was very happy to get that oyster from Miss Victoria. So I don't think it's a... Could the note have been upsetting enough to cause him to be sick? That's my whole point. My whole point was I considered that, and then I've ruled it out because he didn't have time to see the note yet. His fiancée is very upset watching this whole scene unfold where the woman's feeding him oyster and giving him the note. He doesn't have a time to read the note. He suddenly gets sick. She's about ready to confront him, and he suddenly stood. It is interesting, though, that he stood. So he was sitting by this point, so some time must have passed. So maybe we should make a note about how much time passed. Maybe I'm wrong. It sure sounds like she was keeping an eye on him. Dalton was mesmerized. I sought to confront him when he suddenly stood. So it sounds like she's keeping an eye on the woman and him the whole time, and he suddenly stood. It's not clear, though. Here they're standing at the buffet table, one arm over his shoulder. Maybe he's sitting down. I don't know. A little bit weird. A little bit weird, but I don't think he's seen the note yet. Here's an important question. Are we meant to believe... So she goes in, she sees him sick. Niles says, I'm going to call an ambulance. He's on the carpet. And then she says it wasn't until the following day. All right, so I think we're being led to understand that he went straight to hospital and doesn't come home. Do you agree with me about that? If so, then the burned letter and the pin had to have happened before he got sick. Is that right? I wonder if we should consider... Someone's got an idea for the code. Okay, before we do that, I wonder if we should consider... So the way we've been reading it is... Okay, maybe the way we've been reading it is he takes the oyster, he suddenly gets sick, runs into the kitchen sick. Right? And then she says after some minutes she goes in. Is it possible we're jumping to conclusions here? And what's happened is what Jonathan said and what I initially ruled out. Is it possible that even though she doesn't tell us, that she loses sight of him for a little bit? He goes and sits down. He sees the note. And he doesn't get sick at all. But he realizes... He's got to go rush into the He's got to go rush into the house. Although he does go into the kitchen. Where does she find him sick? He's in an upstairs corridor. Okay, look, I think something's going on here. Kitchen is not equal to upstairs corridor. So I wonder if the scene, we just jumped to a conclusion that he got sick from the oyster and ran, like holding his mouth, into the kitchen. But is it instead, because he goes right to the hospital, is what happened that he saw the note, rushed in to head into the house through the kitchen, and he's not sick yet. But he's doing something else. Is it possible he was not sick at that point, and he's gotten sick afterwards, maybe even tried to kill himself? One of the reasons I find that compelling is because there's a note in the fireplace and a pin in the fireplace. But the question for me is, when did they get put in there? If he rushes in, gets sick, gets taken to the hospital, that pin had to either be put in there before or by Niles. I'm going to put a note here. I'm going to make a note here. When put in fireplace and by who? Because the timeline is weird here. All right, let me check in the chat. It seems like we've got a theory about the codes. Let's reread here a little bit. Do we know when the engagement announcement was moved forward around the same time as the police visit? That's an interesting question. Dalton's past is interesting. It sure is. It sounds like it was probably related to this club, though, perhaps. Although he's wearing the pin on his lapel, so he's not hiding the club at the time she met him. Okay, Debbie says, I have an idea for the code. The 8 rotations of the C shape represent letters A through H. The double shape represents I through P. Total of 24 letters, which covers almost the whole alphabet. That's a little, that almost doesn't thrill me, but let's take a look at that for a second before I come back. Debbie says 8 rotation. Let's just confirm that, because that's an interesting observation in and of itself. I think you might be right. So let's see, if have we got basically have we got these angles like this? This is what Debbie was saying in terms of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Are these the 8 angles? Like, is this, we would call this, if we label these, 1, 2, 3, 4, probably not the most intuitive way of labeling the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. I double labeled that one. Okay, 7, 8. So are they all in these, not orthogonal, what do you call those? Cardinal locations? What do we call the 8 locations? Orthogonal are without the diagonals. When you add the diagonals, what do you call those? Cardinal directions? So I think Debbie is right that we've got everything is always rotated on these 8s. That's quite significant. Well, if you're right, we could assign a code as Debbie has. This is first grouping of 8, second grouping of 8, third grouping of 8. Well, we could try that. We could try to figure that out, maybe offline or maybe later. Not a bad idea, not a bad guess. Either way, whether that's the code, that this is A through G or H, I guess, A through H, as Debbie was saying, or not, it's certainly relevant. It feels like them being in these 8 directions are useful to us. Okay. And Tina says, I thought of that too, Debbie, but so many 4-letter words. I think I agree with Debbie here. Debbie says words could be deliberately separated into groups of 4 letters. This is common in creating ciphers. Yes, I want to agree with that. It's not uncommon to just arbitrarily break symbol groupings up to make it easier to manage. And Song of the Lute seems to be agreeing with that. Okay, faking sick is an option. Well, it's true. Well, yeah, I don't think he necessarily pretended to be sick on his way in. Jonathan thinks that she didn't keep her eye on him the whole time, and he did go somewhere privately and read the note. The note might have stressed him out enough to have an ulcer attack. I'm starting to get hot on the idea that he wasn't even sick when he ran into the kitchen. But I do want to point something that seems very important to me. If he was running into the kitchen sick, then the burned note and the pin was not done by him after he got inside. It either was done by him before or by the servant or someone else afterwards. However, if he ran into the kitchen not yet sick, then he could have done that. And I even wonder that he might have tried to kill himself. But I think the other big clue is that kitchen upstairs comment. He comes in and it mentions the kitchen. Now, if you were sick and throwing up, you would go right into the kitchen and throw up in the kitchen sink or bucket. Instead, he's found in the upstairs corridor getting sick. That's very suspicious to me. He's in an upstairs corridor, retching over a table of ornaments. Maybe we should note that. Like, were the ornaments including his pin or something? Why did he go upstairs to get sick? I don't think he was sick yet. I think if he was sick when he ran into the house, he would have stayed in the kitchen. I think we're just jumping to conclusions to think he ran in sick. It doesn't say he ran in sick. It doesn't say he was even holding his mouth when he ran in. It just said he decided he immediately had to get up and excuse himself. And I don't think he's sick from stress. That's very interesting. Do you want to try to decode this? Message based on Debbie's reading of the angles. Shall we spend a little bit of time doing that? I mean, it feels like we could end this session here without worrying about that yet. But, and people could work on that offline. I guess maybe while we're here, while this case is so compelling, we could take a little bit of a look at this. Okay, so let's point out last two letters of the alphabet, Y and Z. You'd want some way to write those. If you're coming up with a code, you can't very well have a code. Well, you can have a code that just says Y's and Z's are going to be implied. Z is so rare that it would never happen. And Y could just occasionally get a code where you can't represent a certain letter, but it's enough of the messages there, you didn't assume it. Okay, but one thing is clear. There's a natural order for the first group, second group, third group, but there isn't a natural order for angle. So this could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, but it would probably be sequentially, and if you had to guess, you might label this one. Okay, but let's see. So going with Debbie's theory, we've got the first 8 letters are in group 1. That's the this symbol. The next 8 are in group 2. That would be, it might have its own different orientation, in fact. But if it was the same way, it would be this symbol. And then the last grouping would be the triple. Okay, so here, if we write this as a B, this would be B, A. Now we don't know what this would be, but B, A, well, if it was the second symbol, it would be a J. We don't think that's right, but I wonder if we can't look for more English patterns. So if we think there's, each thing here is a letter, do we see any double letters that would lead us to think of a double E or a double O? Not really. Although we've got a couple of sequentials, right? Like these two would be sequential of the first group. And here again, sequential of the first group. Let's see, what would those likely be? I guess it could be a lot of different things, but it wouldn't be a CD. Starting a word, well, these aren't sequential. Here's a C, oh, we don't know that these are word breaks. We don't know that these are word breaks, but we could be looking for E, one of the most common letters, and A, one of the most common letters. So if that's true, what would be our guess at what the C or what the A, E or the E would be? Maybe this one would likely be an E or an A. We've got 3 of those, although this is quite common too. Can we match those to E's and A's? Is it that this one is very common and this one is very common? Could those be our E's and A's? So this rotation, these are opposite. They would rotate 1, 2, 3, 4 away from each other would be this one and this one. Are the E's and A's 4 away from each other? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, they are. That's very, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's very promising. So if that's, let's call that an A, and let's call this an E. If that's an A, then I don't think that's going to be right because, well, it could be. Let's see what we've got here. I don't know if I want to be writing on this since we may change our mind. If that's our A and that's our E, then this is going to be our B. This is going to be our F. Okay, so that doesn't work. BF doesn't work. A, B, C. Sorry, that wouldn't be F. That would be our D, right? A, B, C, D. That would be D. Okay, that doesn't work if that's our A. But what if that's our E? Let me just see what this looks like. If that's our E, then that means this is our 5. So that would mean this is our 6. This would be F. E, F, G, H. This would be our H. That doesn't quite work. So, okay. Well, I like the way this is going. It's just going to need a little bit more work. And maybe... So this is interesting. This one is 2 away. Should go next to each other, right? If this is this way, 1, 2. So 2 away from each other start a word. So if that theory is right, 2 away have to start a word. So it could be AC, CA. Although we should remember you could have a word break here. So even if these 2 letters don't seem like they could make a word, like I ruled these out by being B and a D, but it's not quite true, because if you had a word break here, you could have a word that ended with B and next word started with D. Very interesting. Okay, I feel like this could be the right path, but let's not spend hours on it, or should we? Let's talk more about the case in general, and then we'll decide whether we want to work on this now. Okay, let's just see what else we got here. John says, I think he went somewhere private to read the note. Note might have stressed him out to have an ulcer. I don't believe it. And Tina says, yeah, now that you read it again, maybe he went upstairs to read the note and then tried to burn the stuff and then got sick. Where do we think the fireplace is? Song of the Lute says you might get more info on the code in your next letter. I absolutely think we are going to get, if I had to guess, that we might get more information on the code, but I don't know for sure, and that doesn't mean we couldn't solve it. All right, I do want to see if we can't figure out where the fireplace hearth is where things were burned. Are they up? Is it upstairs where he was found, or is it downstairs? I retrieved his portfolio from the study, she says. There I found several unexpected items. The folded newspaper from his desk. That someone marked up. We don't know who. Now, he's in an upstairs corridor, reaching over a table of ornaments. But we don't know where his study is relative to the upstairs, right? So that's tricky. Although he does say how he went in and met them for the interview questions. Does that give us a key? Clue? Yes, okay, so look. This is sort of important. He has a bite of cake and he goes to the study. So the study is where he's meeting with the reporter. That's where the fireplace is. Let's keep that in mind. Then the man's a devil. Sounds like he might be threatening him. He might have, well, I guess that the newspaper headlines that are crossed out that say indecency, that could be, the reporter could be trying to blackmail him, but that wouldn't be that wouldn't be the note you would give. Like if you had a meeting with a guy, you wouldn't give him a crossed out newspaper headline that said indecency, right? You would just tell him, here's what I'm here to blackmail you about. But it is interesting that they're pointing out that they were in the study for this. And then he comes out angry. And then he's going to have more interviews. An interview to someone in the Daily Mail. He's not that upset, obviously. Promised an interview. Doesn't say where he goes for that interview. All right, let's see. The note might be from the newspaper reporter. Yeah, it just seems like a weird thing that a newspaper reporter would give him. The name of the case is the Fickle Fiancés, right? Are there more fiancés to come? It is a interesting point. Is Victoria Sonny's fiancé? She's devoted to him. Interesting. Is there any sign that he tried to commit suicide after she goes back into the hospital? Because I'm sort of curious about that possibility. I also think it's worth us spending a moment considering that idea that something else is being conveyed here. The I was used to cross out the Y. So someone added an IN and then an I on top of the Y. So we've just read this literally, like it's pointing out he's got indecencies. That's certainly the most likely case. But we should at least entertain the possibility, especially now that we know we've got some sort of code or cipher, that this could be conveying some other information. Especially if, since this note about the headline is not so easy for us to understand why someone would be giving him that information. Could it possibly be a key for this? Just an idea. Although I don't think this needs a key. I think we're on the right path here. Okay. Maybe the newspaper guy just showed the article title changed to indecency to show him what he planned to write and provoke a reaction. I don't know. I just find that a little hard to believe. Like, you've got a meeting with him. You're the reporter. You're always challenging him about his past and upsetting him, or you're trying to blackmail him. That clipping where you've rewritten in changing decency to indecency just sounds much too subtle. You would just tell him, hey, I'm here to blackmail you, or I'm writing about your indecencies. Why would you be like, hey, here's a note. Here's a scribbled headline I did. It's very weird. That's more like something you would leave for someone to give them a threatening feel. Like maybe you would leave that on someone's desk to be like, to give them a feel like you can be anywhere you want. You can drop this off. You're sort of a veiled threat without having to be there in person, etc. Alex says maybe the 3 is a double letter if we combine columns. Well, it's a I'm not sure. A key for the code might show where to begin the rotation. That's interesting. I think more importantly, or worth noting, is Alex's comment that we should keep in mind that we've been grouping this way, but you could group in columns. However, there's a clue that tells us that you're not grouping in columns. And what's that clue? That clue is this. If you were grouping in columns, you'd have columns of 3 until you got to the end, and then you might have a non-full column. The fact that we've got full rows until we get here strongly suggests that we're reading left to right and that the columns are a coincidence, that they aren't a grouping of import. But it's an interesting idea. Well, we've been going for an hour and a half. This is absolutely normally where we would stop. The only question is whether we want to spend some time working on the code. I have a feeling with this group, we might have some people who between this now and next week work on this code. So the real question is whether we want to do that separately or whether we want to do it live in this session. Song of the Lute says, is it possible that he got sick from the fireplace fumes? That's interesting. Emmy says, I think the study is downstairs. Debbie is warning us she's definitely going to be working on this code. It's possible that the note and the headline were both put in his pocket by the woman, and she's like, here's the key to it, or here's the threat, and here's the note that spells out details. Is there anything weird about the way this is phrased? The I was used in part to cross out the Y. So an I on top of the Y, I'm thinking, doesn't really help us, just makes it spelled more sensibly. If we want something to change word to have to do with the symbol, maybe the crossing out the Y with I shows that the same symbol can represent both letters. That's an interesting idea. So there's your theory of the Y. Alex says the 3's and the last line are next to each other. You're saying these 3 might be our double letters. If we think these are arbitrary breaks, then I guess we have other potentials for double letters. Not really, though. This would still be our only double letter if these are connected. Well, it's an interesting point that if you wanted to guess where a word might span boundaries, a two-letter word would be a very odd thing to end on. So it would be not a terrible idea to think that these are one word, part of one word. That's a pretty clever observation, that ending in a two-letter word is unlikely. And so this is probably part of this word, and then that would be a double. If the original theory about this 3 being in the last group, you would expect here it had to be a double from here. There's really only one candidate for a double. That would be a T. So if these are our T's, if this theory is right, it's a little bit problematic because it's hard to think of a word that ends with a double T and then a single letter, especially a double word and then a single letter from this group. In fact, I can't think of any common English word that ends in TT and then this. Your only choice would be the E, or remembering it could be a long word, but that's a very strange word. Keeping in mind, it could be someone's name, but still. That's my other favorite word other favorite technique for breaking these codes is to think what plain text might be found encrypted here. When they used to do when they worked on the Enigma in World War II and they were breaking the Enigma code, the German Enigma code, one of the ways they would do it is, so Enigma code is being used to send secret messages often between submarines and ships. And what the British would do is they would deliberately set up an event on certain islands, either let a ship get killed or did something, and then they would know, okay, the messages going back are going to mention the name of this island, and they would be looking for an encrypted version of that island's name in the message. All right, let's see. Debbie says T is in the triple grouping, not the double one. Oh, I see. This is a double grouping. I redid this. I did this as triple grouping. Okay. Well, so if you were going in the double grouping, you're right. This should be double grouping. You might expect a double O, maybe a double P, possibly N, M, or L. Actually, lots of possibilities. But what would be our double letter and then ending in a word letter here? So it can't be PPE. That's not a common enough word. LLE, unless we got someone's name. We might want to write down all our names. OO. OO would be a good candidate. And then what would it end on? A D? OOD. OO. No, not ending in F. OOD would be our most likely candidate. If this was OOD, would this be... Unfortunately, that's not our F. Food would be compelling. But what would this one be then? It could be a T for stood. No, sorry. We think this is OOD. If this is OOD, then this one could be... If it has to be from this last group, could be would. That seems unlikely. But it could be understood or something with a T. If this is an O, then we're looking for a rotation of 1, 2, 3 to get this. So from the O, sorry, if it's facing them this way, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, could either go in either direction. So we could either go 5 forward from the O, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be an L. That wouldn't work. Or if it went in the other direction, 1, 2, 3. 3. I don't think so. It's hard to know what letter would be, or if this is T-O-O-D, like you were hoping for understood or something. What letter, if this is O-O-D, or even if it's just an O-O from the second group, it's hard to know what would be here before it, and then what would be in this first group. Easy way to do this might be to write code to do this. Okay, Jonathan says, I have to head out. Good luck cracking the code. All right, I think what we should do probably to keep, we've already got an hour and 40 minutes. And the whole point of these sessions is they're supposed to be fairly short so people can do it on the weekend session. So we're going to stop here. But if we want, we could have an extra session during the week where we just work on the code. That might not be a terrible idea. Just sit down here and play with the code for idea. Maybe if someone solves it, they'll post in the comments. Don't post the solution, but maybe you can post if you solve it. Maybe you shouldn't try to work on it alone. Maybe you should wait till we work on it together. I don't know. We'll have to figure out how we want to do these cases. But it's tempting to sit here for a couple hours working on it. But maybe the whole point of these sessions are to break them up into small sessions. We've already broken that rule a little bit, but let's stop here. It's a pleasure. This group makes these things fun. It feels like we've got a good case to dig our teeth into. I've got my suspicions that maybe he tried to kill himself. But I like the other ideas that maybe throwing this thing in the fireplace has poisoned him. Very intriguing, and a very intriguing cast of characters. Can't wait to see the next letter, but I hope we can crack that code or make some more. Actually, I hope we can't crack the code. But curious. Okay, I will see you sometime during this week for something. Visit the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel. There's a link to it on the YouTube About page where we're going to discuss what games to play throughout the week. Or you can stop by the Discord for this channel where we have our last minute unannounced stream planning and you can help decide when to do it. And if people want to have a session to work on the code together this week, post a comment in this video, say what times are good for you, or on the Board Game Geek Guild, and maybe we can pick a day and time this week to work on this code together. I'll see you next time.